I know some of you are skeptical about the existence of angels. We actually have an archangel here with us today. Did you get to keep that blazer, Elliot?
No, I did not. Nor did I really want to, given that it was a women's size medium that did not fit me.
Now, did they have too many women's blazers because of the wokeness of the arc form? Is that why they had so many women's blazers?
My sense was that, so they a few weeks before they gave out this poll for all the people helping out. That was like, give us your size, and without like a size guide for like what exactly would fit who. So everyone was kind of guessing their size, and I guess everyone thought like way off because there were like what another 20 women's size S's that no one took, and probably a good chunk of the men's sizes M and S that were taken away by people. So we're kind of yeah.
Oh man. Oh man. Well, this is a bona fide randos conversation. Elliot has no status on the internet that I'm aware of.
Not at all, no.
Maybe you have a giant Twitch following or you're a World of Warcraft gamer. None of those things.
I had 20 YouTube videos I made as a high schooler that are all now deleted because they were too cringe for me the moment I hit college.
Oh, that's just a tease. Now I really want to see him. Now I really want to see him. Anyway, I met Elliot at ARC. He was one of as I think who was I don't know who dubbed these all these artists because when you get there, a whole bunch of us are sort of lost in London looking for places. Then you see this massive sign that says ARC with the big swoosh. Not to copy Nike or anything, but and and then you find all of these young men and women wearing these bright white um, they're kind of polyester, not really windbreakers. They're just they look
They
good.
were
They look
called
good.
golf jackets.
Golf, there it is. Golf jackets. And they look good. I mean, it's all very and so then somehow somebody dubbed these things, you people, archangels. And Elliot comes up to me at one point and what exactly did you say to me?
I can't remember, but I was hunting for you for about 15 minutes with the other guy, my friend Zakar, who does not actually watch you. But I was like, I'm here to meet like three people total. Can you help me find them?
I'm a pretty easy guy to spot though, in all fairness.
Fair enough.
I'm
Well, we did find you
tall.
pretty quickly.
What's that?
We did find you pretty quickly into the search.
And that's no small thing at ARC because this year especially, you had like 4,000 people there. It is a real challenge to find someone you're looking for at ARC. It really is.
Oh
So
yeah.
so so Elliot comes up to me and confesses that he's watched my videos and so that was fun. And so we I feel a little guilty because not only did I sort of try to colonize Ark a little bit with having estuary meetings there, but we also sort of colonized, maybe corrupted one of their archangels. What does that make me?
Well, depending on how you view art, you probably for some people that's probably a good thing.
That's right. That's right. Well, we will. Arc is will probably not be the main focus of this conversation, which will encourage and disappoint some. The main focus of this conversation, at least how it begins, is going to be you, Elliot. It is. This is your moment. This is your randos. Ta-da!
Yay to the 300 people who will watch this.
The 300 people who will, I'll clip the heck out of it. I'll try and drive more people here because
You
I
you
think
had you've had two people from art recently on, right? You had Daniel Strange's conversation I just listened to while I was ironing my laundry today, and the other guy, the Orthodox father from New York, whose
yeah.
full conversation I've yet to listen to. But now you get like some rando university student from London.
Rando University student from London, but yet not from London, which is
Yeah, no.
where we will begin because, um, well, tell us about the home you grew up in, Elliot.
Yeah, so I grew up in Indonesia, Jakarta, the capital city. I'm actually there right now. It's 11 p.m. like
Oh,
halfway across the world from where you are, Paul. And it's a good house. I have a brother and a sister, and two parents who they're all Christians. We're all Christians. Although I reckon out of all of us, I have uh, I'm probably the one who's sort of like most into church activity type stuff. But I grew up with parents who brought me to church. I very distinctly remember when I was young. It was a very like that church was quite tinted with a bit of a prosperity gospel kind of sheen to it. And we didn't realize, my parents didn't realize this until way later. I had no clue what prosperity gospel was when I was there. I was like 3 years old or something like that. And I very distinctly remembered as a kid, my parents would buy me toys. So I would like make craft toys out of like cardboard and paper. And a movie that was out not around the time I was there was Wall-E, and he had like these binocular like eyes, and I wanted to do that, but I found the paper really hard to make into those shapes. So I noticed that in the church, like once a year at the end, for all the kids, that you get little points throughout the year, and at the end they have this like store where you can trade in your points for toys. And I had this pair of binoculars that were just a little bit out of my what I could afford with my points, and I was very disappointed with that. Can't tell you anything else about that church, but not so long after that, my parents they had some issue with the way that they were preaching the gospel with the whole prosperity gospel thing. They moved to this. It's called the Reformed Evangelical Church of Jakarta, so it's Reformed Evangelical Church, and they've been there ever since. And I go there whenever I'm here in Indonesia.
now I have so many questions for you.
Okay.
I have so many questions for you. It's really very embarrassing. But so Indonesia, as some people know, was a Dutch colony,
It is, yes.
and and so there is a Reformed church presence and influence in Indonesia. But if I'm also not mistaken, Indonesia is by population the largest Muslim country in the world.
Yes, yes, it is.
And I'm super curious about how that works in Indonesia. So tell me a little bit about growing up Christian in a very Muslim country, but not all Muslim countries are the same by any stretch. So
Yeah,
talk to
yeah.
me about culture and Christianity and Islam. I'm super curious about this.
Yeah, well, I'm very terrified to make any comments, and then some sociologists in the comment section will go, actually, that's not quite correct about and all that stuff. But roughly how it kind of works is
Speak of your lived experience, Elliot, your lived
my
experience.
people in Indonesia are predominantly Muslim, but there are so Indonesia is sort of like a bunch of different like islands and whatnot sort of put together, and there are sort of a lot of different sort of races and ethnicities sort of involved in it. So a lot of very indigenous folk, and but they also have their own little traditions and whatnot, and so there's a lot of Islam that came here spread by trade, and there's sort of there's some more orthodox areas, some places that sort of have very like strict Sharia law type stuff. One specific province sort of has that over uh, takes precedent on Sharia law over sort of the governmental laws, because the government's technically a secular government. It's not a religious institution. Um, but yeah, and so religious sort of affiliation can differ according to sort of each of the different kind of like ethnicities and traditional groups and stuff that you go. So I'm Chinese Indonesian. So my family emigrated to Indonesia from China, depending on which side of my family, 4 or 5 generations ago. And so I don't really have any connection to Chinese culture. I have a Chinese name that I don't know how to spell, and I vaguely know of, but I can't speak Mandarin. I can't do any of that. And Chinese Indonesians aren't really Muslim. You get a lot of Buddhists. You get a few uh, sort of ancestor worship type things going on, and then you have a good chunk of Christians. So my family, my parents' story is probably more interesting than mine in terms of Christianity. But my father, he grew up Catholic. I think my grandfather converted to Catholicism because of sort of like some pressure to get away from Chinese culture or whatever. And so he grew up Catholic and then converted to Protestantism at some point in his college years. My mother, however, she did not grow up Christian at all. She was, I think, either Buddhist or some kind of ancestor worship type thing going on in their family. My grandfather still is not a Christian, and my grandmother as well from my mom's side. But around the age of 14, she was sent to Catholic school because that's sort of like the big fancy schmancy schools around. And there she sort of came to Christ and became a Christian, a Catholic at first, and then again later in college, where she met my dad, they both became Protestants, and they got married at some point, and here I am now, the result of that mixture.
Interesting. So, Jakarta is a major city. I know that.
Oh yeah, yeah,
It's a big city.
very big city.
Is it the
Um,
capital?
it is the capital, at least for now. They're planning to move it, but I never really know what's going on with that. They've been saying that for a good few years now.
Okay. Did you go, what kind of, is there public education or is it sort of segmented by different ethnicities or religions? How does primary education work in Jakarta?
So there's sort of there's public education around, but then there's also private schools. I went to a private school because my mom is on the board of managers of that, and so I get to sneak in with a little less tuition fee, which is great for my family. But my the particular school that I went to was a Christian school. It was actually based off of a homeschooling system from the United States. It was very weird, very fundamentalist, young Earth creationist type teaching going on in the school, which was quite interesting to deal with
Wow.
growing up. Um, so you go to museums and they talk about evolution, and because your textbooks are like, no, well, that's all wrong. You're like, that's bad. Why is that there? Yeah, so it's stuff like that. So I grew up in these Christian international schools where you're encouraged to speak English, which was great because I English is my first language, even though it's not the national language of Indonesia. And so you had like your daily devotionals by teachers who were not, they don't really know how to preach, so it kind of bored all the students for like 30 minutes in the morning and all that good stuff.
Wow. Wow. You are a picture of globalization. There have been so many different streams from so many different places and times in the world that all come together to make you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Well,
go.
here's a little fun fact. So my full name is Elliot Marvel Asante, and which is a really weird name for a Chinese Indonesian to have. My dad didn't want to give me a generic name, so they picked Elliot, a very, very kind of British sounding name. They didn't know Marvel Comics was a thing, but they wanted my name to sort of mean like we give thanks to a marvelous god. So they just couldn't think of a word, so they just put Marvel slap dab in the middle of there, and which has I feel like I should pursue a career in Marvel just because that's my middle name at some point. And my last name Asante is Ghanaian in origin, which I have no connection to whatsoever. But so my parents don't really have last names due to some complication with family registry and whatnot. My dad has no last name. He could take my grandmother's first name as his last name, but he didn't want to do that. So it caused him like visa passport type issues because it's like really your name is that just that, and so he so for my family he decided he wanted to give us a last name. I was obviously so I'm the eldest kid, and so he gets to pick. And he goes into this Christian bookstore thinking like, oh boy, I'll find a very biblical name here. He sees this postcard which says something along the lines of Asante means thankfulness, and he thinks it's Greek. It's not. It's a Swahili or Ghanaian or something like that. And he thinks that's my last name. And we never found out that this was African in origin until I came to the UK for university. I met the security guard who was like, "Where'd you get your last name from?" Oh yeah, all the globalization things just kind of merged together into what I am today.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. See, not enough people watch Rando's conversations. Not enough people are going to watch that last story that you told and appreciate it. It is just the truth. It is just the truth. Wow. So, secondary education. I mean, because what was does See, it's so complicated. My knowledge of that area of the world is so poor because, of course, Singapore was this hugely important British colony.
Yes, yeah.
And I know, that's because part of it is that the colonials sort of come into a part of the world like Indonesia, which has all these little islands and archipelagos, and you have all these different little peoples. And so, of course, these Europeans want administratively, they've got to sort of clump them all together. So then you get these nation states, which are just sort of put together. And it's amazing that Indonesia has, I mean, they did fight a civil war because I know Dutchmen went to fight there. And I actually met a guy who fought there once, and that's a whole nother
Yeah.
story that I won't go into. But um, so was your education more British or American or some other thing? What was your education until university like?
My formal education is sort of it was pretty much that fundamentalist Christian type of education system. Which I say fundamentalist Christian. I don't mean that in like a negative way. It was kind of weird, and I probably like
Keep talking. I'm getting a water bottle. Keep talking.
all good deconstructed, outgrown some of those bits, but by and large, it was sort of that. You also had to supplement it with these Indonesian mandatory classes by the government. So you'd have to take like the language classes. I had Mandarin classes that I never really did well in. I kind of like just learned the words to pass a test and forgot them the moment that I they left my brain for the test. But it's probably a good blend between that American fundamentalist Christian type of education and that sort of Indonesian governmental like mandatory type classes. Yeah,
Okay. Now, the reason I'm asking all these educational questions because you wind up in the UK.
yeah,
You're currently a university student, correct?
yes, I am. Yeah.
How do you wind up in the UK going to university after, I guess maybe all roads lead to London? Is that the way this world works? I recently did a little bit of research in my Google Analytics. The city in the world, the number one city of PVK listenership in the world is London,
Wow.
which really surprised me because the United States is usually between 50 and 60% of the listenership, but the number one city is London,
Wow. Okay.
which blew me away. I was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
wow.
Um. So the question is like, how did I end up in London? I
Yes.
don't. I'm gonna publicize this my mental reasoning as a high schooler here, which is great. You have
We,
my
we, we've been high schoolers once. I think we all understand. Don't we won't
I
I won't
have a
hold
lot
it
of
against
friends
you.
who were sort of like they had these grand I know this girl who's ambitious. She wants to redevelop the creative industries in Indonesia and whatever. And so she had this plan set since she was in high school. My kind of reasoning basically went, okay, so you're a fairly privileged middle class kid from Indonesia. I speak English, so I wanted to go to a country that speaks English, so I didn't have to learn a new language. I really didn't want to do that. And so I thought to myself, right, so you kind of have your pick, but you don't have that many options. You got the States, you got the UK, you got Australia, you got New Zealand, and you technically have Canada, but I kind of forgot Canada existed as a country when I was making my decision.
Oh
um,
man, are we gonna get heat for that one? It's a well,
it's true.
so many jokes jump to mind. I'm in such trouble.
It was around the time too where there was that meme going around about how Canada's not real and whatever. Uh, but basically, I kind of thought I didn't want to go to Australia because all the privileged middle class Indonesian kids who have money they go to Australia, and it's not some haha I want to be different kind of mentality. It was more like I could go my whole life in Australia not talking to new people. I could stay in this bubble of just Indonesians, and then it wouldn't really have a point, right? That would be kind of the same as going to university here. I didn't want to go to the States because it was like all the schools there are pretty expensive and they're quite far out. I wanted to study a design art degree, so it's like how much money can you really sink into that thing? The States is pretty expensive, although and also it's
London's
very
not
far.
cheap.
No, it's not. So I ended up picking the UK. I actually didn't plan to go to London, but I ended up finding out that in order to go to university in London, I had to take sort of this year in between called a foundation year. It was sort of like because the UK school system is kind of weird, and they have like an extra year or whatever, and so I could sort of catch up with that.
Canadians
So
have
I
that too. They call it grade 13. So just I gotta look at Phlebas is gonna be all over this thing. I mean,
I would have never known because I forgot Canada existed. But so I did that, and I had two options between London and a city called God, I don't remember the name of this city anymore. Brighton,
oh,
and I was going to go to Brighton because it had the better campus. But then my dad looked on Wikipedia, and it was called the most godless city in the UK, and he was like, "Nah, how about no? We're not doing that." So I ended up going to London, and I actually quite liked London, although I ended up going during COVID, and so it was fairly quiet, fairly like I didn't end up really doing much in my first year, but I liked it enough that I came back, and it had a really good university for arts in London, so I kind of went there.
oh, well, that was fun. That was a lot of fun. Well, okay. So there's so much going on. Oh, and COVID's are in the mix too. Well, before we get there, let me ask you about, I mean, you could pass in America for
Yeah,
an American. I mean, there's no English accent, there's certainly no Australian accent. You could easily
no,
pass in America for an American. Why do you have an American accent?
YouTube and Disney Channel. Um, so this sort of goes back to why English is my first language. I mentioned that. That's not really the norm. It is more common now, but it was not really a norm when I was growing up. And the reason for that was basically my parents, they had this brilliant idea in their heads. They were like, all right, first kid, we want him to succeed. We're going to make him bilingual. We're going to teach him Indonesian and English. And so this plan was because my mom studied English for university. She could speak English really well. She would speak to me exclusively in English. My dad would speak to me exclusively in Indonesian. And I kind of grew up learning both of them. And that was their brilliant plan. And then the slight chink in that plan was basically that my mom worked at the school that I went to as a preschooler, and my dad worked very long hours. So I just get that bit more of exposure to English, which means I pick that up more. So when I look for books, music, TV, all that stuff, it was all English. And I watched way too much Disney Channel as a kid, and as a teenager, that transitioned to watching too much YouTube. Not even as a teenager, probably more like as a 10-year-old, I just watched way too much YouTube. Um, and so I just kind of developed this accent. It's not even it's tricky because it's like it's American, but it's not American tied to a location. You know?
Right. No,
Um,
that's right. It's not any region in America.
yeah,
It's this
yeah,
generic American
yeah,
media
yeah,
accent.
yeah. And media is the right word because it's pretty much just like YouTubers speak, as far as I can tell. Um, I've met a few people who are like, "Where's your accent from?" And then I'm like, "It's not." They kind of say the states, but then people from the states think, "No, it's not because it's not from a specific region." And when I say YouTube, and they're like, "That's it. You sound just like that YouTuber I watched as a 10-year-old or something like that." Uh, and that's kind of where I get that.
Wow. 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 It was funny because my first trip to London, went to a church. I preached at a church, and then we went out to lunch at some restaurant after church. And I was sitting next to a guy. I think I don't remember exactly his whole story, but I remember him complaining that his younger siblings all had American accents because of YouTube. And
Yeah,
wow, the YouTube accent. Okay.
it
All right. So you go to London. You're off at college. You're a long ways from home. I mean, Jakarta to London is a long. How far to fly? How long does it take to fly from Jakarta to London?
just the flight itself probably like 14 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
I have a layover, so maybe add like 2 hours in there somewhere.
Where do you lay over between Jakarta and London?
Sometimes, most of the time, Turkey. If my parents like to splurge, I get to go to Singapore for an hour or two. That's yeah, easy about that.
How often do you get back and forth?
It used to be sort of like twice a year, once for summer break, once for winter break. This year, because it'll be my last year before I try to find work in the UK for a little bit, I'm coming back 3 times. So I came. This is the first time I'm back this year. I'm back in July and I'm back in December again. So roughly every 3 to 6 months, somewhere in there.
Okay. So you go to London as a college kid. Well, you have COVID, so then there's that. But after COVID, because you do you decide to go to church, and how do you decide where to go to church?
That, you know, one of the first things I thought of when I came to the UK, sort of like when lockdown and everything sort of left, was I was like, right, I'm going to go to church. I'm going to go to church every single week. And sort of what happened was near the end of high school, with COVID hitting, with a bunch of my friends moving out, there was like a thing with the girl that didn't want to date me or whatever. I was like, man, life isn't feeling so great right now. And so I was just kind of like, what in the world, in this world, could like really help? And I thought about the fact that I have this faith. And I thought, man, if something should be able to help me withstand life not being great, it should be my faith. So I looked into it and I sort of I stumbled my way into sort of that Christian apologetics side of the world. It sort of blew my mind that there was kind of this more like intellectual, argumentative, sort of like rigorous way of looking at Christianity. Growing up with that sort of very fundamentalist Christian kind of education system, sort of people going, you don't have to believe that the Earth is only 6,000 years old or whatever. Like you could, but you don't have to. That was like amazing. And so I just kind of like I spent all of my time just like watching and reading and all of that stuff, all the debates, all the William and Craig 5 points or whatever. And but it was all sort of just thinky talking, right? It was all just in the head. And I thought, right, okay, if I'm going to do this seriously, and if I am convinced that this is true, first thing I have to do is I should probably go to church every week. So when I came to London, the first week that I came, I made this friend online who was in my university, and she invited me to go to this church that she was about to visit. Now, around this time, I was super into Tim Keller, and I heard this talk that he gave online where he said, like when he preaches, the key thing he has is that the sermon always sort of has to point back to Jesus and the gospel. And so I was like, right, that's my criteria, just the one thing. I came from this Reformed evangelical church that was it wasn't quite a high church, but it wasn't like very casual low church. The guy in the front still had a suit, and sometimes he wore a robe, and everyone. It was all hymns and everything. It was very. It felt quite formal, and so I didn't even think of all that. I just went to church. I was like, I want to hear the gospel preached, and it always has to lead back to Jesus. I came to the church week one, and the pastor did that exactly, and I was like, sick. This is where I'm staying. I'm never leaving, and I've been at that church. It is very neat. Three years and some odd months later.
Well, tell me more about this church.
It's oh now I get to promote this church. Oh, they're gonna okay. This it's a church called Grace London in Waterloo. It's in London. It's a low church type of thing. They do it out of a school auditorium. They don't have their own building. It's a very lovely church. It's got a weird eclectic mix of people, me included in that bit. The pastor of this church is the son of the second successor from the Westminster Chapel, who had what a famous guy. What was his name? Martin Lloyd Jones.
Oh
Martin
yeah,
Lloyd
yeah.
Jones is sort of he had a successor, the successor. His son preaches at my church, and that was pretty cool to find that connection because I heard of Martin Lloyd Jones from Tim Keller, who sort of he's sort of the one who sparked the whole criteria that got me into that church. It really went sort of somewhat full circle if you take a few steps back. And yeah, they sing, contemporary worship music with their hands in the air.
Yeah.
I don't do that because I'm still grounded in my Reformed evangelical church. Your hands are down here. You don't say anything different. It's all hymns on one piano, kind of vibe, and I'm still there 3 years later. But
Well,
I really come to look.
we'll send Mark D. Parker and Ron Copperman from the House of Woo after you, and we'll get those hands up. I know that the Canadians want their elbows up, but you don't know anything about Canada, so don't worry about that. The
I've got them halfway up before, and then after that, I just felt like, no, I feel like my pastor's moving down my shoulder from Indonesia.
okay. Well, first of all, let me say that the one church in London that I've preached in was a church a lot like that, and I loved that
Mm,
little church. You met John Lumgar and his brother Simeon at Ark. That's
yeah,
their
yeah, yeah, yeah.
church.
Ah, okay, okay.
And oh gosh, if you go back and you find like the video I did with John Van Donk, um, the video I did with John Van Donk right after the my first trip to Europe, where I summarized like the whole thing with that, had a really amazing event in that church because a woman in that church had a dream. Did you ever see that video?
No, no, I don't think I've seen this one. No.
Oh, okay. So you have to go back and you like Paul Vanderklay, John Van Donk, Europe tour, something like that. So John Van Donk and I, after the whole tour, we sit down in our hotel room and we just kind of talk through the whole tour. And that's where I tell the story of this dream that this woman had about me months before I got there.
Wow.
And it was wild. But it's I love that little church, and actually, I felt bad because John, sent me an email a number of months ago and said, "Our church is looking for a pastor now. Could, any possibility you'd be interested?" And part of me was like, I there was the reason I got to Sacramento was my father was about 5 years from retirement, and the church I'm in now was interested in calling my father, and my mother is like, you mean to tell me that at this stage in our life we're going to move across the country to California? And my father was like, he was all gung ho. He thought this would be wonderful, and not that I think my wife partly would love to go to London for a number of years, and my kids would all come out and visit, and but because my wife is quite adventurous that way, we were foreign missionaries after all. But practicality in terms of all sorts of other things, it was like that's probably not going to happen. So the
Yeah.
church that I preached at sounds very much like your church, and I loved it. That's in a lot of ways, my kind of church, my kind of people. It's like the church I went to in college, which was very reformed, but also a bit charismatic, and so that sounds absolutely
That's kind of
wonderful.
how the church is described. It's a reformed charismatic kind of church,
Yeah,
the Great
yeah,
London. Yeah.
yeah. So that is so cool. How did you find and get into Tim Keller?
Tim Keller did a lot of like apologetics type stuff, and sort of like at the time, my brain's filter was like, "Oh, if you're not talking logically, I don't want to listen to you." And Tim Keller was so brilliant at sort of doing that, but then not being like a nerd about it, you know? Like you hear a lot of these apologetics types guys and they talk about things and it's like, well, is it A theory or B theory of time? And at the time I was like, yeah, which one is it? And now I'm just like, oh boy, I don't know if I care about that question. Um, but Tim Keller did it so brilliantly where he took sort of the logical kind of like way of thinking about this, but it was so relationally centered as well. There was sort of like clearly there he cared about people, and that shined through. And so coming from some of his more cultural apologetics types talks, I ended up listening to his sermons. And I ended up listening to every single sermon he's had on his YouTube channel like 3 times over or something. And I still go to some of like I have a few in my head that I know I go to when I'm feeling a certain way. When I'm feeling angry, I listen to his sermon on anger, and usually 40 minutes of that's enough to calm me down and make me think through what I've done.
Wow. See, I had a major Tim Keller phase from like 2006 to 2012. And I listened to, back then, most of his sermons you had to pay for. They were like 250 a sermon or something like that.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah, I bought a lot of them. I sent a lot of money to Redeemer Press buying sermons in those years, and I listened to them mostly um, on MP3. I wasn't, I mean, I really didn't sort of dive into YouTube until Jordan Peterson,
Yeah,
but I could find some Tim Keller sermon or Tim Keller talks on YouTube. But mostly at that point, before 2011, 2012, I was much more an MP3 person. I would download those MP3s. I mean, that was even before smartphones. I would download Tim Keller MP3s on my, everybody hold on, because I've always been contra narrative. I'm not an Apple guy. I download them on my Zune.
I
My
have no clue what
Zune.
that is.
You have no clue what a Zune is. A little piece of Bill Gates' soul just died. Um, but and then I would download them on my I just had these various MP3 players. I would burn them to CDs and I would play CDs with MP3s. That's how old I am. I would burn CDs with MP3s and play them in my car stereo where I'd stick that CD in that player in the car. So and then of course, then I had all kinds of other, I had this little digital hard drive that I could plug in, and then I could like have lots of Tim Keller sermons on there, and I could listen to 2, 3, 4 hours of Tim Keller a day. So yeah, secret. That's so. When were you discovering Tim Keller? Because, like everybody, Tim Keller, if you pay close enough attention to him, he's got all of these phases that he kind of goes
Yeah,
through.
yeah, yeah. I kind of got, man, what year would that have been? Probably around 20, like probably late 2020, 2021-ish is sort of when I got into it. That was sort of the end of high school and sort of really getting into my like what's foundation year of university.
Yeah, so he's already, just, not soon, not too long before his death then.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah. It was fairly recently. Not it took a few. It was a few years after, but it was a very sad thing even for me, just because even in that amount of time, I've like you listen to so much of his content that you feel like you've known him for a very long time, and it's
yeah,
actually only 2 or
yeah.
3 years or something.
And you're definitely going to get into Martin Lloyd Jones if you listen to enough Tim Keller because he leans on Lloyd Jones a ton for a lot of things, and at least he was back in the aughts, in the middle of the aughts.
Yeah, I haven't quite gotten into Martin Lloyd Jones. I know the name, but I've heard a little bit here and there, but I haven't quite gotten into a Lloyd Jones phase. I think I moved on into weird phases of the internet after that. Got into that Jordan Peterson guy a little bit
Yeah,
after
yeah.
that.
All right. So
Like,
how did you find me? And I mean, well, how did you find Jordan Peterson? Because usually it's people sort of having a meaning crisis and they're kind of in my experience, especially in the early days of Jordan Peterson, not a lot of Christians around. And
yeah,
and the Peterson Peugeot pipeline was just getting started. So how on earth did this work for you?
I was quite late into the game. I think I got into him after he was fairly popular in Christian circles. Although I'm fairly disconnected from those Christian circles, especially at this time. I hadn't really gone to church yet, and so I sort of went through all the internet phases on my own. I think I sort of like I first listened to him because he sort of was very tangentially related to those apologetics type things. He had a talk with William Lane Craig and some other lady whose name I can't remember.
Oh yeah.
And I
He
remember I
he
heard it
did
there.
that in this nation that will not be named.
Uh, but they, and I didn't really like him at the time because I heard him and I was like, no, this is all against all the
That was
apologetics.
not his best performance. That
Fair
that was
enough.
not a great performance.
And then after that, I heard him on Unbelievable, where he was talking with Susan Blackmore and all that stuff. And I thought, oh, this is an interesting guy. So I watched all the Jordan Peterson, oh, this crazy liberal woman videos for a bit, and I got really boring pretty quickly. But then I discovered he had those like Bible narrative type of things, and I was like, oh, that's interesting for me. So I listened to a little bit of that, and I got into sort of like that kind of thing. I had this game with a friend of mine who kind of listened to Peterson too around this time. where I would do this terrible Jordan Peterson impression, and he'd just tell me a topic to go on, and because Peterson's the kind of guy who you listen to him enough, and he sort of says kind of the same things over and over and over again, and you kind of pick up on those patterns, and it was not hard to do an impression. If you can do Kermit, you can do Peterson, and so I was in this for a while, and then what happened was I stumbled across Jonathan Pajot because I knew of Bishop Barron before I listened to Peterson, and he had a few talks with Bishop Barron. So I was like, nice, I know that guy. That's a Christian. I like Christians. So I listened to a few, and there was a talk that they had where Jonathan Pajot was there, and I didn't know who the hell this guy was. So he was just not in my sort of salience landscape and whatever. And so then but then I listened to a talk with Bishop Barron and him where he was like, we're the only two Christians on that talk. And I was like, oh, Christian? I like Christians. So I listened to his stuff. And he was all about narratives and symbolism. And as an illustration, I was studying illustration at the time. So a lot of what I was doing was very narrative based. And I thought, oh, this guy's interesting. So I got into this long Jonathan Pajot phase, which frustrated many people because kind of what I do when I get into a phase is I kind of just repeat some of the things that I've been hearing, testing out how they work in the world. And no one understood me because it's all Pajot. And it's pretty hard to understand Pajot. I actually met a guy much later. It was just like last year, I think. He's a guy in my church. He was a crazy guy. He got into Christianity because of psychedelics. And he was a big fan of Pajot because of all the symbolism and stuff. And so I talk with him about that now. But I got through a long Pajot phase that no one really understood me for, and I frustrated a lot of my Christian friends. We're like, just say something that makes sense, Elliot. And at some point, I stumbled across a conversation between you and Pajot, and I thought, oh, so this guy is sort of a little bit more close to where I'm at because he's not a Orthodox guy because all the Orthodox guys are kind of there and they talk about what they're on about, but they're kind of weird. And the likelihood that I'll ever become Orthodox is probably not terribly high. So, I know a few Orthodox people who would be very upset with that sentence, but it's just what it is.
You already offended Canada. Why not the Orthodox? Keep going.
But then I started listening to your content in the mix with all the other stuff, and I thought it just was. It was able to take all of these sort of thinky, talky, abstract type stuff and make them relevant in a way that people could understand. Because I can talk a little bit about Pajot, and some people would kind of get it, but you need a lot of filtering and a lot of translating. People are sort of uninterested in the Jordan Peterson stuff because for Christians, there's a lot of that, like, oh, he's not Christian, or oh, that's just metaphors and whatever. But then sort of talking about what you talk about, then it makes more sense to people. I can't show your videos to them because no one wants to watch a video titled Sam Harris eradicates evil by performing brain surgery on religious grizzly bears, which I loved as a video, but it's very hard to convince someone to watch.
You mean that title doesn't doesn't that slay with the normies?
Listen, I looked at that title and I thought I gotta watch this. But some reason it doesn't work with some people. I don't understand it.
Surprise, surprise. That's so bad. It's so bad.
It is still the video I showed people when they asked me what kind of podcast I listen to. I go to a very progressive art school, so I can't tell them I listen to Jordan Peterson. I casually cited him in my dissertation and I brought it up in a thing, and the girl next to me was, you mean that conservative guy? And I was like, yeah. So I can't really bring Jordan Peterson into my daily life, and the Christians are kind of sick of him too. Jonathan Pajot is a little bit more accessible, but the titles are accessible, the content is not, and so
so neither my titles nor my content is accessible. So cite me all you want. You'll get it. People will be like, huh?
I've been trying. I've been sending some of your videos to my friends and they just ignore me, or they watch it and they don't tell me. But I've been trying.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the effort. I appreciate it's probably a lost cause, but I appreciate the effort.
I mean, you got
Oh,
me into this stuff, so like,
oh boy. Oh boy. I hope I don't start getting angry letters from your parents. That's all I'm worried about. Okay, so you're nearing the end of your university education? What's
yes. So I finished my undergrad last year.
okay.
I took a master's degree just because I had the opportunity with some family who told me they were willing to fund me. And I was like, well, I might as well study everything now so I don't have to ever write another sort of academic paper again in my life. So I am doing that. And in the UK, a master's degree is 1 year and 1 year or 1 year and a few months. Mine's about 15 months total. So I'll be done in December. And that'll be my studies. So a few more months to go with this stuff.
And then what? And what are you going to do next?
I'm hoping to stay in the UK has a visa scheme to allow people who aren't UK citizens to stay for up to 2 years without really anything else going for them besides that they graduated from a UK university. Hoping to get a job for a year or two of that, and probably returning to Indonesia after that. I don't really see myself staying all too long in the UK, but I'm going to maximize my opportunities while I'm there.
Sounds smart. And then we'll see how well these videos about Sam Harris and grizzly bears, get shared in Indonesia. We'll see how well that goes. Although,
Maybe I'm planning to sort of attend the UK estuary at some point when I have the time. And maybe after enough time, I'll try to implement an estuary group in Indonesia. That might be fun.
oh, John Van Donk would be able to die happy if you would have an Indonesia group in Indonesia or estuary group in Indonesia. That would make him so happy. John and the cockles of his little Dutch heart. Um, he's gonna hear that. He's gonna be, poor John Van Donk is gonna, you know, really, rue the day when he became my friend. So, well, Elliot, I don't know to it unless there's some other corner of your life you'd really like to expose to the internet. I've badgered you with questions at this point, and I don't know if you want to take the conversation a different direction. It's your time.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the things that I've sort of been thinking about recently was sort of okay, so we have all of this TLC kind of stuff. And what exactly is all of that for and how does it sort of play out in individuals' lives? Because I see a lot of these people, they're sort of engaged in this online community. You have the live streams, you have all the people commenting and whatnot. And I've never been much of a commenter type of guy, like I watch the videos and I'm just silently appreciating people. And I kind of just lurk there. I was a lurker for a very long time. But what I have noticed about sort of a lot of the stuff around this, because it's all sort of very relationally focused, is I do think it's sort of had this uh, downstream effect uh, where it does actually help me with relationships in real life. And I thought that was super interesting. And I wonder kind of, it's kind of a weird thing where the more you dive into this sort of online parasocial, well, not parasocial, but kind of parasocial relationship, you end up getting better at meeting and talking and engaging with people in sort of the real world. My current course is an advertising course, and one of the first tasks that we had to do, like week one, was go outside and talk to a random person about coffee and learn all you can about what they think. And thought, oh my god, if I was given that task 2 years ago, I would have been utterly terrified. I hated talking to new people on the street. But over the past like year and a half, and through various things like church, but also through sort of listening to the way that conversations are done online here in this little corner and whatnot, I think it's really helped me sort of when I heard go talk to a random person, I thought, oh, this will be fun, which is a thought that would have never occurred to me 2 years ago.
That is very interesting and I think very true. Just recently, I played it on one of my recent videos, but it was, it was in fact a Canadian who shared the story about the fact that because of a brother's conversion to a different religion, nobody in his family sort of knew how to talk to his brother because of that religious conversion. And he credited his experience doing these crazy things like we're doing now with helping him just recently have a really substantive conversation with his brother again. And I think you're right in that we don't, um, Toastmasters advertises themselves as sort of a way of, you know, learning to do public speaking. I don't know if you might have never heard of Toastmasters. Um, that's an old people thing. Sorry, Jerry. He was just on the. He talked about Toastmasters, but in a lot of ways, the TLC is all about exactly what you talked about. Because if you're going to come out of the lurk, you're going to wind up having conversations with randos on the internet. And that's a scary thing for a real reason because part of it is, I think, the proceduralism of the internet and lurkerdom and anonymity and all of those issues in certain spaces have created very toxic, relationally toxic environments where you put an opinion on the YouTube on something, you're going to get flamed. And in fact, the those dynamics aren't a bug, they're a feature of how the internet is structured. And I think a big part of what we've sort of stumbled into together is an attempt to, I think it has a lot to do with hospitality, but that game of troll flaming is just it's just really shallow and it gets boring quickly. And I think even the apologetics, YouTube apologetics game was also shallow, and that bottomed out fairly quickly. And so
Yeah.
we there is a hunger for real productive, satisfying connection over the internet, and especially around obviously what's most meaningful to us. And that's religion is going to be what we call religion is going to be there in that matrix of issues. So no, I think that's right. I think that's right.
I also think that sort of applies to people in real life as well. I've made a few really good friends in the past year alone, just because, and part of why we've become friends is sort of because they just were like, you really like listening to to what I have to say. So there's that need for love and relationality and being listened to, not just sort of online, but also in in real life. And I because people sort of put so much of their lives online like you that need for like more genuine conversation online sort of also transplants itself into actual daily life as well.
I was just listening. So Christian Baxter just had a his Christianity in Transition Metagelical live stream that he
Yeah,
did
right.
yesterday, and I was just listening to that, and I was thinking about very much what you just said in terms of listening. We are used to seeing on YouTube talking, and the assumption is that listening is going on beyond the screen, which may or may not be happening. I think a lot of what is behind Joe Rogan's success is that Joe Rogan is a good listener and he is genuinely curious and he takes people seriously, even if a lot of people in the world. I mean, he's Alex Jones' personal friend. Now, a lot of people don't take Alex Jones terribly seriously, but Joe Rogan does because he's his friend. And he will listen to Alex Jones and he will try to sort of sort through things and say, well, maybe I don't believe that a lot of the world is really lizard men in disguise. But I think and so and the funny thing is that the I had heard Joe Rogan's name before, but I think the first time I watched anything with Joe Rogan on was the first time he had Jordan Peterson on. Because of course Jordan Peterson was my entree then to Joe Rogan. I'm still not a big Joe Rogan listener at all. I'll usually only listen to Joe Rogan if a bunch of people point to a particular video. And of course, I mean his videos are very long, and I already now am embedded in a community that makes long videos. So Joe Rogan is actually fairly far down the salience hierarchy for me. But
Yeah.
but some people do. So I think you're right. And I think this question of modeling listening is maybe it should be the listening corner. I mean, the nice thing about TLC is you can play with it so many different ways. But because I think that's a lot of it. And just watching Christians live stream where Luke F, because we have a number of Lukes. Luke F met Joseph for the first time, even though they probably, again, partly because of the distributed nature of the corner, there are already so many corners within the corners
Yeah.
that if I say Joseph, who's in diaconal training for the Orthodox Church, and Luke F, who now has his own channel, even within the corner, there are very disconnected elements of the corner. So and just a few of us sort of see a lot more of what's going on. But even I have one of the best positions to see people in the corner, but even I miss a lot. And as you said earlier, the vast majority of people who watch these videos, I so I'll tell you a little story. I did I tell this story already on the channel? I might have. I was in Tahoe with my son for his 25th birthday, and a rando who doesn't even log into YouTube um, was on Florin Road for work. And so
Okay.
he decided to come by the church just in the offhand chance that I would be there, which I'm around church a lot. It's a pretty good chance that you'll find me. So he comes to church and he meets a guy who's now in his 90s. He's got serious short-term memory issues right now. And the guy's like, "Oh, well, Paul's not here right now. Let me take you to his house." And so, and the guy at church, the 90-year-old, has this bicycle that he pulled out of the trash, out of somebody's trash pile once and sort of fixed it up. That's what he rides around on because he lost his license. And so the poor guy has his roller bag that, of course, he's just on this 1 day business trip to Sacramento for whatever on Florin Road. He's running behind the church guy as the church guy is riding his bicycle, shows up on my front door. My wife opens the door. And of course, the guy with all the memory life loss is like, a pastor used to, and my wife is like, yes, I know, using his name. I'm using her name. Um, Come on in. And here this poor guy winds up on, you know, is now my wife just having to make up chit chat by the dining room table because, and but that's how he comes out of the lurk. And so actually, I got a text. My son, I was driving. My son's like, so and so showed up with a rando at home and mom's trying to entertain them. I was like, call her up, make sure she's okay, and then put me on the phone with him. And I told him, I said, well, next time you come to Sacramento, here's my email address, and let me know before you're coming, and we'll do lunch. But
Yeah.
um, it's just, I still, one guy, of course, I get this question all the time. It's in the comments from the last video. What's the TLC? And it's like, yeah, that's a good question. That's a really good question, and we're still trying to figure that out. But it does have a lot to do with listening, relationality, taking each other seriously, not tripping over the usual boundary markers that we all have. So that was too long a description, but
No, well, fair enough. And I think sort of one of the sort of my invested interest in sort of all this YouTube content stuff has always sort of been how can I sort of like play this out in my daily life and what really works and what doesn't, right? And so Peterson stuff works for like getting your room in order, although my room's not exactly particularly tidy. It's tidier than most, just not that tidy.
there you
Um,
go.
um, and Jonathan Pajot is sort of like, oh, it's really good when I read and watch stuff, but I can't for the life of me talk to people that way. But then sort of all of this relationality stuff, this really works, I think, because I think I said before I go to this fairly progressive school, and it's like, well, how the heck does this Indonesian guy who's Christian and fairly traditional, how do you run around in those circles and work? And I think it's just talking to people and paying attention and sort of when the thing that they say that triggers the thing in your head that goes, no, that's not quite right. I just have to go, shut up, let's let them talk. And then it's always very surprising. So I think I mentioned this at the Estuary Art, but I have these friends who are one of them's a socialist, the other one's an anarcho-communist, and oh boy, that's a whole bag of worms there. But and all the things in my head from like Jordan Peterson, like communism's like all terrible gulags and whatever, right? It's like it's all in there, but you gotta go. Shut up! Don't talk about that, right? Like let's hear them out, and sort of where that conversation ends up is after talking a little bit about religion and how they think religion is dumb and whatever, all that stuff. Um, they sort of end up at this place where they say, I don't really think communism, socialism, all this stuff. That's not my most fundamental belief. So, oh, that's a really fun opportunity. Okay, so what is your fundamental belief? And they tell me, um, it's that people should really love one another. It's all about love, man. And I go, oh yeah, well, where does that come from? Tom Holland's debating that's kind of stuck in somewhere in here. And really, I found this is sort of the case with a lot of conversations. Is that you sort of step out into the dark and you don't know what's going to happen next. And always at the most unexpected place, I find Jesus is there somehow and somewhere. Whether it's it's a bit more obvious with my Christian friends, but with my secular friends, it's always like, oh wow, there's a lot of that. And so you don't get there if you don't pay attention to them. If I didn't like shut up and listen to them ramble on about how anarcho-communism actually saved the world, then then I would have never gotten there. And then I learned a little bit more about these people beyond sort of the I'm a political activist facade that they kind of have going on. There's always a lot more to them, and it's always so fascinating getting there. And you don't get there without sort of the relationality stuff that you get here. Because if you can listen to Randos talk on the internet for 2.5 hours or whatever it is, you can definitely go through some weirdo in your real life, talk about whatever it is they're going through,
Yeah,
and they
it's
always come out more interesting.
yeah, and it's actually a lot easier to talk about to have that conversation with someone you have an in real life conversation with. Because
Yeah, yeah,
if you didn't have already a relationship with them, I mean, there's probably other connections that you have, even if they're an anarchic communist or something like that. You already, maybe you play Dungeons and Dragons together, or maybe you go to the same school and you just wound up eating lunch together and you found some other commonality. And so, no, you're right. You're very right. And actually, there's a lot of Tim Keller in that because that was, in many ways, Tim Keller's evangelism strategy. Because Tim Keller would say to that communist, what you're really looking for is love. and you're trying to use anarchism or communism to express that love, but perhaps a better the love you're looking to express and to know actually comes from this Jesus of Nazareth, and it's expressed on the cross, and it's validated and vindicated in the resurrection, and has been popularized and spread throughout the world on the church to the point that you couldn't have communism without Christianity
Yeah,
either.
yeah.
And
I'm
so,
still trying to figure out how to do that, how to land that plane. I'm kind of having these ongoing conversations with these people, and I see them on and off, and then I'm always like, can we get to the good stuff? Can we talk about that really important stuff, and not, oh, how's the weather? But you gotta play a bit of that game first. Talk about, oh, what was school like today and whatever. But they always come up. Um, the conversation's never really over, and that's something I've also had to learn. I had a friend in my first year of university, this Chinese girl who somehow wound up listening to Hillsong music in China, of all places, and she really loved it. It was one of her favorite things to listen to. So when she came to the UK, she was like, "I want to go to a church." And I didn't meet her when she first came to the UK. I sort of met her near the end of my first year, and she ended up going to a Mormon church, and I was like, "Oh no, that's not so good." And I sort of lost contact with her for a few months because she really hated going into uni. And the next thing I knew, I met up with her, and um, "Oh yeah, I went to church. It was a Mormon church. I got baptized, and then I left." And I was like, "Oh wow, what the heck?" And I was hoping to continue that conversation, the religious conversation with her, but I think after that she sort of lost interest. But I still talk with her, and it still pops up every so often. And
yeah.
so the conversation is not over. Um, Never is. And that's the best part about the real life conversations as opposed to these online ones. Is there's no 2 hour time limit on them. Like I can meet up with these people again and again, and they all have their different viewpoints and these dim echoes of the internet content I listen to. I met up with a guy in ARC who he told me, "Oh, you seem like an interesting guy. Let's talk." So we talked, and he was just this. He spoke like Peterson, like to an unbelievable degree, and not in this like corny like copying way, but like his thought process was so shaped by probably maps of meaning that was how he talked. And so for me, it was like I got to talk with sort of like a Peterson that I could talk to at my level, and I could test out sort of where my thinking like landed and didn't land, and I can do that in real life with this guy, and I can probably talk to him again. He's not quite in London, but I certainly could try to find him if I want to talk. I don't know, Pajot weird symbolism stuff. I have that friend who loves this stuff. I can talk about that and see where his thinking lines up, where it doesn't, and so you get all of these in real life, you get all of these sort of like mini versions of all of these internet type thinkers that you hear. And you can actually engage with them and you can relate to them in a way that's just you can't do online. At least not with a lot of effort.
That's very true. That is very true. And well, I think it's especially true of the stage of life you're in now. I actually yesterday in our estuary meeting, we were talking about how, marriage and singleness sort of impacts marriage is sort of a closing off of certain things. You really start to limit and not just because, you take other people off the table romantically, but just because family and children are such time and attention consumers of and they have to be, and it's right that they are, but there's sort of that narrowing. But I think you're right. And again, I see that as sort of the genius of Tim Keller was that move where you can, and it's very similar to, again, the Daniel Strange conversation that I just had, that there's a limited number of intertwined human needs down at the bottom of us
The
that,
magnetic point.
yeah, the magnetic points that need to be satisfied. And as long as they're not satisfied, there's these dull, slow aches within us that sort of bring us down to these points. And and actually Christianity, part of the reason I think it's so successful is that it addresses these needs very well. And for that reason, it's just really hard to keep taking off the board because in Jordan Peterson talk, it would be, well, that's archetypal. But it's really hard to sort of take off the board.
Well, and if there is a God who sort of designed everything and designed people to be relational, then that would kind of be how it is. It's sort of built into the way that human beings are, that you need to seek these meeting points, and that you sort of, like how Jordan Hall was talking with Glenn Scrivener about how it's all going to be found relationally. That's sort of very true. And I think for all of the seeking of answers in sort of technical philosophy and apologetics type stuff, the best ways to sort of find all that has very much sort of identifying sort of like the ways to sufficiently like fill up those questions through those analytical question and answers, as though you could think your way into, oh yeah, now I'm happy. You kind of have to embody it and live it out. And so it was being part of a community, finding friends, engaging in those conversations, being at church every week, and then meeting my friends in school and midweek routine and all that. And that's sort of where all of that stuff comes together and makes sense.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And the I think part of the even though this isn't Tim's fault, I think it has to do with sort of the background in which and the context in which we sort of listen to Tim and his apologetics. The the assumption was if you would sort of map out the logical arguments and show sort of the logical progression, then everyone would follow it. But the truth is, and I think Tim knew this, the truth is that's not actually how people work.
Yeah.
People are nowhere near, at least the vast majority of people. There are a few people out there that are sort of like that,
Yes. Yeah.
and can stick with it.
Yeah.
And I think partly, possibly, the rise of autism has increased the number of people in the world that sort of work procedurally in that way. But for the vast majority of us, all the, Vervaekean four Ps and the much broader complexity that those express, they all are most easily connected with in persons and relationally. That is actually the platform, that is actually the forum. It is not a theoretical, abstracted, logical progression, which so much of post-Enlightenment, or history after the Enlightenment just sort of intimated to people that this is the way things should work. So if I want the world to become Christian, I just need to really clearly lay out the logical arguments, and then they'll embrace this little packaged thing called Christianity. And again, the difficulty, of course, is that, oh, you know what? Going to church every week, that's actually kind of important. And that's part of that package. And a whole bunch of these rituals, traditions, practices, beliefs, that's all in that package. But it isn't the package. I mean, mentally, we imagine that a package is something that Amazon can deliver to my home and I can pick it up and manipulate it and possess it. But life isn't that simple, and that it is fundamentally relational. And, poor Ethan, who's just new to the corner, was like, what do you mean by, you hear Jordan Hall talk about relational ontology and John Vervaeke talk about substance ontology versus relational ontology.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
This sounds like word salad. I don't know. Yeah, okay. I might be able to go to the dictionary and look up a dictionary definition of ontology and maybe have a sense of what you mean by relationality. But the truth is, language isn't quite as um, deliverable as we would hope it is. And that gets borne out in the complexity that we see with all of our relationships. And
Yeah.
the fact that, this young woman fell in love with Hillsong music, joined a Mormon church, got baptized into it, and then left because obviously something happened. And now maybe she won't be in church again for another 20, 30 years. I mean, that's the way people's lives go.
But then sort of where the relationality comes into it is the only way she would ever go back to a church like that is if there is another person who's sort of there to talk, to have relationship with. Because then why would like you can, especially online, you can hear anyone say anything. You want to argue for any position possible, there's probably someone out there who will say it. And why would you trust any of these voices? The way that I sort of understood that the relationality stuff is fundamental is very much like, there was that idea that I think sort of Peugeot's and Peterson, they were right to point to this fact. Everyone kind of thinks the world is mean, and they forget that the sorry, because everyone thinks that the world is objects, materials, just objects, and atoms and particles and whatnot. But then the way that they observe the world has meaning so built intrinsically into it that it's invisible. But then if you actually look at the way that the world is held together in our perception, then meaning is involved in that. And I think it's similar with the relationality thing, which is okay, so you can have all these arguments about facts, and you can have all of this sort of like, well, I believe this and I claim that and whatever. And it's like, there's too many of them. The way you come to believe what you believe is because someone has said it to you and you trust that person. And people have their own criteria of what makes a person trustworthy. People say it's credentials. I don't buy that it's credentials because, like you'll have two people with PhDs who say completely opposite things. And who the hell knows what gets you to trust one person over the other. But there's always that, all of this information and facts and stuff, that's all going to be communicated to you by people. And so all of these facts and arguments and sort of that logical sort of like step ladder thing, that's all going to be nested in that relational thing among people. Um, and so the way that you navigate a world like that is you become a person who other people want to talk to. And so that way, the things that you have to say has weight to it. And it's not sort of this mercenary kind of like, aha, I'm going to be very nice to people so they listen to me, so my ideas get credence. I really think that sort of the ideas and sort of the way that people engage, they're very nested in one another. Some ideas don't really lend themselves very well to creating people who want to talk and engage and listen to other people, while others do. And the ones that get people to talk and to talk well, because the apologist types will love talking, but they don't necessarily talk well. People, they don't. I was part of this meetup of apologetics types people, and you have the really insufferable types who are like, no, that's wrong, that's not right according to. There's this one Orthodox guy, he's a little bit trolling. He's sort of calling. He's like, I'm so sad that most people. It's a very Protestant group chat. I'm so sad that this group chat, like, they don't really listen to Paul, or they all believe a different gospel or whatever. And it's like, okay, no, sure, you're not gonna get anyone to your side that way. And then that's the relationality being fundamental to it. It's that if you're not going to make yourself a person who other people want to listen to, your ideas will just die. And so for the ideas to spread, for the facts and the truths and the logic and all that to go, you need to have the relationality first. That's sort of fundamental in that way.
Yeah, it was at the end of the John Vervaeke, Elizabeth Oldfield unheard conversation where I thought Vervaeke really landed that nicely. That you see that in people that the believability is deeply connected, especially to people in our real life, with how they treat us. And yet there's also, so I was watching on Netflix now, there's there's a documentary about wrestling, Mr. McMahon, and it's sort of going through the history of Vince McMahon and wrestling. And it was very interesting because, Hulk Hogan sort of put the WWF on the map, and then Hulk Hogan retired, and then he unretired, and like the Ted Turner wrestling thing happened. And so then the, Vince McMahon and his organization, they tried to have another person step in and become the new Hulk Hogan. But there's always that je ne sais quoi, this that we can't. So why was Hulk Hogan so magnetic and attractive at the time that he was? And same thing with the Jordan Peterson wave. Why did Jordan Peterson hit like he did with a certain group of people? That same thing of Donald Trump. I mean, it's just and you get down to this fact that there are elements to people that are so complex, so mysterious. We can't fully reduce them to syllogisms or sentences or characteristics that we can name in using language, but we see the impact out in the real world, and that impact is undeniable, even if it can't be reduced. And then it always suggests to us that, oh, then everything that we're saying is just post hoc, just so arguments. But no, that's not really true either. It's not it's not true that the logos, the language, the words don't have purchase on reality. That's not true. But it is so complex, we're not going to wield it. We're not going to master it. But we are going to be able to engage and gain some purchase. And it's all of that in between stuff.
Well, one of the things that I think Tim Keller sort of instilled in me was a very big appreciation for Lewis as well, and sort of that image of like people are complex beyond belief. It sort of reminds me of this thing that he said where someday you're going to see the people next to you because they're not there's no such thing as an average person. Everyone around you is an immortal, and I think when he talks about I don't know marriage or it might be Tim Keller or something, but they talk about how you're going to see this person as they really are someday, and it's going to be far more magnificent than you could ever imagine. That if you saw them now, you would be very tempted to worship that thing. And and I think it's such a beautiful thing that you can get a dim echo of that now just by talking to them, and that's such a fascinating thing. Uh, and you really do see it. Some of my best moments in the past year have just been, random conversations in like a restaurant or something with people. And and if you just give them the space, they'll show you a little bit of that thing, and it's so cool to see.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. People are amazing. They really, really are. And I think Peterson said this well. He said if you pay enough attention to sort of get past, let's say, your own boredom, your own biases, your own filters, and of course he had to experience this as a clinician because you sit in a room with that other person who the reason they're there is because they've got some problems, and it could very well be they have really deep, difficult, intractable problems. And you are now stuck in that room with them for probably hours on end. And I've seen therapists try to talk their way out of that room because it's like, I can't take it anymore. I just need to get away from this person. But
Yeah, yeah,
if you actually lean in, pay enough attention, get beyond yourself enough, you will discover that way down in there might really be something quite amazing that you can benefit from. So that's, one of Jordan's first 12 rules, first groupings of 12 rules for life, basically pay enough attention to someone because there's probably something you can learn. And that's a good rule. That's a good rule. So,
it's something that I need to remind myself of very often. Because even though I sort of talk a good game here, some people in like the after church social, they come up to me because we've had a conversation before, and I think, oh boy, it's this guy again. Do I want to talk to this guy?
yep.
But then the guy is already there, so I go, yeah, sure, let's chat. So what's up with you today? And and eventually it always goes somewhere where I go, wow, I'm very glad I've had that conversation. And then the
Yeah.
next week it'll repeat the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'll go, oh, I don't want to talk to him. But every time I do, and every time it always works out so much better. Um, it's a bit of a shame because some of the people I'm thinking of, people talk about them like, I don't know about talking to them. It's always goes so weird, and it's yeah, that's the fun part of it, you know.
Yeah.
When he talks about all the stuff he normally talks about, that's where it's kind of meh.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I've really enjoyed doing estuary because with estuary and doing it every week, even though in my estuary group, in terms of my regulars, all of them are very obviously interesting people. Even more interest for some of them, far more interesting than themselves realize they are. Um, but in a context like that, it tends to sort of draw out surprising things from people because once people get a sense of, okay, nobody here is gonna kneecap me or uh, savage me relationally or my reputation or anything. I can trust the people here. Then people will begin to say things and do some disclosure that is like, oh, wow, that's really surprising. I wouldn't have expected that from this person. But now that they've made that disclosure, that sort of fits in with the rest of the elements and hmm, interesting. And now they are more a more interesting person than I thought they were. So, no, it's very true.
Paul, do you do sort of small groups, community groups, whatever you call them, at Livingstone's?
Well, we have estuary meeting every week, and then we have men's and women's Bible studies.
Yeah, okay.
So we have two women's Bible studies, one men's Bible study, and then estuary every week. That's currently our small group program at Livingstone's.
Do you find that sort of between estuary and the whatever of the Bible studies that you go to, do you find that the sort of the substance of conversation? Well, obviously the conversations will be about different things. But do you find one more able to sort of draw out the unique, interesting parts of people better than the other? And if so, why do you think that is? Or if not, then
I do think estuary is particularly good at it because it's so open-ended. Bible studies, by their format, are not quite as open. Now, our Bible study, so the two women's Bible studies, they use Bible study guides made by our denomination, and basically our denomination sort of ripped off Bible Study Fellowship. So it's that sort of type of Bible study where the Bible study materials are a scaffolding that will help the people studying the Bible have a little bit of orientation in terms of, Reformed evangelical interpretations of the Bible. But in both, in what I've seen with the women's Bible studies that have been around here for decades in our church, the Bible study is good and it's valuable, and women definitely grow and appreciate it. But the lifeblood of the group is the community. It's the it's the it's the praying and sharing together, and it's the sharing of the meal. Our morning coffee break group, they always have food. That coffee break is the name of the program in the CRC, and it goes very well. With our men's Bible study, I have had men's Bible studies on and off here at Livingstone's the whole time I've been here. I'd start them and they would just sort of wither, and then one of my elders got that one going during COVID on Zoom because a lot of things were happening on Zoom. And it turned out for a lot of the men, Zoom worked a little better
okay.
because they're at work during the day and to get home, grab a quick meal, and then head to church or head to somebody, it was just difficult for a lot of working men to add another thing on their schedule every week. And if, we tried twice a month, but twice a month, you have too many particularities in individual lives that if you miss one of them and you're meeting twice a month, you're going to go a whole month. And if you miss two of them, you're going to go 2 or 3 months. And it just, I didn't have the critical mass, the numbers to sort of keep it going. Whereas on Zoom, when all they have to do is, turn on a computer and go into a quiet room. And also for some of my seniors who they're not driving at night anymore, but they're sort of shut in. That then worked. So the men's, and then I could also, because the numbers are small at Living Stones, there were a few people that I sort of gathered from the internet world that because I knew, just because I knew the people well enough, I then gave them a special invite to the men's Bible study. And that has helped because what it gave me was a few people who are really solid Christians, because coming into the men's Bible study are some, at least at Living Stones, some new Christians. And so it was just really helpful. I didn't have to sort of provide all of that scaffolding and all of that Christian memory and interpretive libraries for the men's Bible study. But still, so the men's Bible study is helpful in that it it does deliver some of the discipleship needs that I need that program to carry at Livingstone. So some of the new Christians coming in can come to that and they will get basic Christian discipleship instruction in that Bible study from me and from some of the other mature and long-lived Christians. But at the same time, so then about 2/3 of the time is devoted to, we don't use any Bible study materials. We're just actually we are reading through the Bible from cover to cover. We
Wow.
started in Genesis and we are now in the book of Judges. And I think I don't know what's going to happen when we hit the prophets, because the prophets, once we get out of the writings and we get into Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, those are tough sledding for people. And I was able to get them through Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, but the prophetic works are really difficult. So I don't know.
Oh,
But we're years before that comes.
fair
But
enough.
the first 2/3 are just reading through the Bible, and whatever people think, I'll usually do some interpretation of it, and then we'll go off rabbit trail sometimes because someone will have a question about something. But the main point of that element of the Bible study is some degree of discipleship and some degree of content delivering. But then the last third again is your standard prayer and share. And that's
Yeah.
where people can say, this is what's going on in my life, and I need prayer, or I'm scared, or I'm frustrated, or whatever. And to me, that's the meat of it. Now, estuary, we don't do the prayer and share because there's no prayer at estuary
Yeah.
because of,
Yeah.
don't want to scare away the non-Christians. So, but estuary is astoundingly open. And so actually, I think for a church to have both a traditional Bible study where you can do some discipleship, where you can pray, to have that available, but also estuary, you're working with different people and so different people's needs. And small groups are small groups are the lifeblood of the church in many ways. The seeker churches, recognized that and programmed for it. And there is just something about a group of 6 to 10 people in a circle that meet regularly that you can do things there you can't do in a big room with 50 or 100 or 1,000 people, and you can't do one-on-one. So it's just a level of, of how human beings work.
Yeah. My church says about our sort of small groups, they say um, this is a formalized version of what really should be happening naturally.
Yeah.
And so they see that it's kind of it's very necessary, but obviously some people don't really want to be doing that. So they made this formal structure, and people seem to really enjoy it. I've just been thinking about one of the things, maybe not an issue, maybe a feature of my particular small group is my leader loves awkward silences. Like he'll wait like 2 minutes before anyone answers a question from the list of questions before he'll move on. And I feel like there's a better way to be doing this. Surely there's a way we can have better engagement with one another and not just sit here 2 minutes silently.
It
Um,
is so hard as a leader to know. I just yesterday at Estuary, we hit a moment and I as the leader was just thinking, should I? Because oh, I've always got something I can say. But should I let that silence do its work? Should I break it? It's such a delicate thing. It requires so much feel, and I let it do its work, and it paid off well. But there are times when you're just sitting there with that silence, and as a leader, it's like, do I talk? Do I
yeah.
let him off the hook? Do I let that silence sink? Oh, it's true. It's true.
I've had the privilege of leading, taking over my small group leader for a week or one specific week, and I couldn't stand it awful sense. I was like, the moment it was like it hit 10 seconds, I was like, right, we're on to the next thing. It was the only week we went through all of the questions on that paper for the year. So I take it as an achievement, but it is hard because I think it's very difficult with sort of the way that those things are structured to get people to talk and engage. And I was hoping to see, oh, maybe there's something that you guys are doing that I could steal and suggest to my leader. But I guess it's probably more so just getting people to be a bit more comfortable with one another.
Well,
So
it's so hard because every single person in that circle, they all are different. And some of them are comfortable with silence. Some of them will be uncomfortable with silence. Some of them are naturally articulate. Others have, you can have very intelligent, wise people who struggle to communicate their wisdom. And you can have people without a lot of wisdom that talk a good game. And all of those things are in the room. It's also difficult with small groups because the so basically the way evangelical church programming goes is there still is sort of a prioritization of the big group meeting. So when you say, I had a friend who once started one of the churches in the Sacramento area, and they were going to go whole hog. This was back in the late 90s, early aughts. They're going to go whole hog in terms of cell church movement. Cell church is sort of a modified house church movement, and you just want to keep multiplying those house churches, but those house churches are integrated in a unified whole. And so they're thinking maybe quarterly we'll have this big celebration event where we'll all come together. But if you don't have to, that big gathering is a very costly thing because you need a space for it. And especially if you're trying to grow in a church in an urban area and you don't have a building and you don't have a space, what it costs you to rent that space is, and then not only to rent that space, but then you have to figure out what do we do in that space and what do we do with that time that is going to pursue what it is that we're actually looking for. And of course, part of the what the Seeker Church movement did was try to elevate all of that to the intentional and to the rational. Whereas, the Orthodox are like, we do the liturgy. Well, always yes. And how? As I was taught it. And can we change anything? We might have to kill you. So, okay. Um, but evangelicals, of course, are just, well, maybe this works or this doesn't work. And are we achieving that or are we achieving that? And so this group was like, we are going to focus on spiritual formation. We are going to focus on making disciples one at a time, both in terms of individual and then in the and their two staff people, my two friends, both of these guys were just they were a great pairing because one had he was a musician, he was a great preacher, he was extremely articulate, a great theologian, exactly the kind of guy you wanted for your big stage. And the other guy was just a Christian formation wonk, and he had read everything. And so, so they were, a year into starting all of these house church life transformation groups and multiplying them, but the overall broader culture was just too strong because they just were always fighting the people of when is real church going to start? We know this is a church plant. We know that you're sort of starting small and trying to build mass. We get all that, but when is real church going to start? And these poor guys, no matter how many times they would go through their elevator pitch about the priority of the small group and yada yada, it never, and so they finally had to succumb and go to the every week big meeting. And then you'll have, you know, most of your people showing up to the big meeting. It's attractional. You're watching someone give a talk and you're using music, but then still many of the people, they still had a lot of that heavy DNA in terms of the small groups. But, as anybody who's done church planting in an evangelical space knows that this is, maybe they sort of look over at the Orthodox and say, well, at least you don't have to think about it. But maybe they do think about it and they don't tell us because, you've got the program set and doggone it, you're just going to run through Chrysostom and you're just going to make the fifth century great again. I get it. I get it. But we evangelicals, we're so mission minded and goal oriented and rationalistic and theoretical and pragmatic that we're always monkeying with the process and the ends and the goals. And that's how we are.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's always a tricky thing. I and you get this where it's like you ask a question and you think that it'll be a fairly simple, kind of straightforward way of solving it, and it just goes into the deep complexity of church planting. I'm just interested in how do I get my small group to talk? And actually, the answer to that is somewhere in building church structure up. And I'm like, oh boy, bit outside of my pay grade that one. But yeah, it's a
Well, it's so funny when someone comes to me and they're like, I visited a church and they know a little bit something about group dynamics and they say things like, does like your have you ever thought about like church and group dynamics? And it's like, oh, you have no idea how much we have thought and talked. And I can show you shelves full of books on theory of psychology and sociology and marketing and, case studies. And I mean, the neo-evangelicalism has so studied itself. And of course, that comes as a complete revelation to someone who just walks in a church and thinks, well, this is church. And it's like, well, go visit the Catholics and then go visit the Orthodox. And you'll learn that there's 1,000 permutations of the Catholics and 1,000 permutations of the Orthodox. And we haven't even started talking about the Protestants. So no, it's massive. And for many people who, maybe they were raised in one church or had, their uncle brought them to church once or something, or visited church now for the first time, it's like, whew, just sit down and let me know what you think after. I'd be curious to hear. And then, but for many people, small groups is one of the entryways into the church. And, even with estuary, if this thing, continues to grow, people will get into church via estuary. It will happen. And but they then will be formed by estuary and actually, I mean, this then gets into the whole question of propositional tyranny, confessionality, perennialism, um, syncretism. I mean, that whole area of it's just never ending. It just doesn't ever end. So anyway,
The churches have, they've dealt with it to whatever degree that it works. Because for all of the talk about like you have to agree to this doctrinal basis, or if you're a member of this church, this is what the church believes, and you have a doctrinal statement on the website and everything. You always find people who are kind of like, I don't agree with a lot of that in the church, sitting among everyone else, and there's always those conversations going around. In my church, well, you have a guy who's casually mentioned, I don't know if I believe the Trinity. And we're like, oh, well, you're still here. So I don't know. You have another guy who we just finished a sermon series on marriage and relationships. And there's one guy who's like, I just don't agree with the pastor when he says that um, it's not okay to date non-Christians. And you go like, oh, well, that's sort of outside of the lines of what you ought to believe in. And those guys exist, but they're there and they're part of the community and they're faithful in their attendance and everything. And it's sort of having those conversations with them. And they're not easy conversations. I had a really tough conversation with a guy who was so adamant that when he gets married, he's going to get a prenup. And that is just like, huh. But but yeah, and so for all the talk that people have of like for all the talk that needs to happen and that's important about confessionality and sort of agreeing to all the things, there's a lot sort of more complicated. It's a lot more complicated with actual people in the pews and the chairs in the church.
it is. And early on, especially when perhaps the percentage of viewers of the channel um, was less churched than it is now, just by virtue of how many people have started going to church. I would regularly say to people, when you walk into a church, you probably imagine that everybody in that church believes in all of the doctrinal things that the church says. Nothing could be further from the truth. And even if they themselves say, I believe everything the church teaches, usually what they know about what the church teaches is only about this deep. And that if you actually start asking questions and start drilling down, you'll find, that's what pains me so much. Poor Sam, poor Sam Tiedemann of Transfigured is always like, you don't watch the part of the problem with becoming a YouTuber in the corner is that you really hope that, well, I watched all of these videos from Paul. Maybe Paul will watch all of my videos, and I always get the complaint, you don't watch enough of my videos. It's like
There's too many videos going
too
on
many
now.
videos, and they're
I've
multiplying.
after meeting Christian Baxter and Marcus, I've subscribed to their channels, and I'm like, oh, this is too much content.
Yes,
I
I
can
know it's
barely
a
keep up, and
lot,
it's only three channels. Imagine if you do all of them. It's
but I do watch. I do keep tabs on Sam's channel, and the irony is that the more I watch Sam's channel about, him being a Unitarian, the more convinced I am of my Trinitarianism. And yet, when I hear, someone like Sam and um, what he's been through with churches, and it just breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart because Sam is such a wonderful guy, and he is, and so I just, but that's very normal in churches, and the difficulty is that for every one Unitarian out there that's, really knowledgeable and ardent about his Unitarian convictions, there's 1,000 wobbly Trinitarians that don't know this or that, or don't think this or that, or if they try to develop an analogy, it's like, well, you don't really want to use that analogy.
that's a heresy. You've fallen for some heresy
That's
somewhere
right.
already.
And that's just the Trinity. I mean, don't even get me started on ideas of marriage and sexuality. And I mean, you're just going to have to face the truth that church is that people are just buckets of all sorts of ideas and or they have buckets of ideas. They're not, that's not actually what they are, but also that we are all this and so yeah, it's I mean, these are the things I think about, and there's no end of thinking about them for me, and on we go. So, what
we have
time
to
is it
say that.
now in Jakarta? It was 11 o'clock when we started.
Oh, it's almost 1 a.m. I'm a college student, Paul. I sleep at like 3 a.m. Uh, no, yeah, fair enough. Um, what was I gonna say? Oh,
I
on
hope
sort
you
of
have
on
thick
that.
walls and you're not keeping your parents and your siblings up.
Um, they're heavy sleepers. My sister will sleep until like 10 a.m. and I'm like, how are you still asleep right now? Like, 10 a.m. is not so bad. Some days she sleeps till like the afternoon, and I'm like, oh boy, you've been in there for a while. I'm not worried about their sleep. Let's leave it
Okay.
at
All right. I just don't want to become a dirty name in your household. You talk to that Vanderclays all night, like you're not even wearing headphones. So, my loud
No, no,
voice is getting blasted to the home.
this room here is specifically for people to have meetings in. This is where my dad does important business stuff, where my sister does her online classes sometimes. So this is a pretty good room to be having this meeting no headphones on. And,
Okay. All right. I just don't want to cause turmoil in your household.
well, households always have some turmoil going on, don't they? Just like church.
Just like church. Just like church. Messy families.
That's what people are. They're very, very messy.
They are. They are indeed.
But that's kind of where things happen, and where it's impactful and meaningful and important,
Yep.
both in the good and the bad ways.
Yep.
It's
Well,
so
Elliot,
fascinating.
you might unseat Ethan as the hot girl in the corner. We'll have to see how that goes. You never know how these things go. Maybe, everybody be like, "Oh, I gotta." So if people want to contact you, how do they find you?
Um, they could email me at asante.elliot@gmail.com.
There we
I'm
go.
I'm also on Twitter, although I'm not really tweeting much. I don't have all that much to say on Twitter. I also post like art stuff on like Instagram, that direct place on the internet. But
Instagram. That's one of the platforms I don't use. I don't do anything on Instagram.
yeah, fair enough. I mean, I know many people who every year they try to quit Instagram like it's a drug, and they succeed. It's sort of, I think someone should start like an Alcoholics Anonymous for Instagram, because my God, the amount of people who try to quit and fail within 2 months is
Oh, there will
yeah.
definitely be another branch of 12 steps programs for social media. That will definitely come. That will definitely come. It's probably coming. It's probably already here or it will be here soon. And someone will inform me of that in the comment section.
I'll keep an eye out for that as well. Awesome. Thanks so much, Paul, for this.
Elliot, it was great fun doing this. It was great fun meeting you at ARC and yeah, it'll be super interesting to hear what these next couple of years bring to you. Have you met Tayo yet?
No, although I've emailed him and he just never responded to me. So I'm going to whenever I attend Azure at some point.
You have
Uh,
to meet Tayo.
yeah.
You cannot be in the UK and have any connection to Estuary without meeting Tayo. Tayo is the heart and soul of the UK Estuary. So and a big piece of the TLC. So that's Tayo. All right,
Exciting.
Elliot. I hope that you don't stay up too late and that your sister doesn't sleep in too long. But it was great
Yeah.
talking to you.
Thanks so much, Paul. Catch you around some other time.
All right, take care. Bye bye.